All right, we're live with Aunt Pat.
And I'm so glad that Michael, my nephew from my brother Johnny, is here with me. And this is going to be an exciting time, I hope. I was born in 1935 in a little town in an area outside of Ada, Ohio. My father was Arnold Leroy Meeker. My mother was Adeline Edith Boutwell Meeker. And I had one older brother, Ted, and then 4 younger brothers. Johnny was born after me, then David, then Larry was born on my birthday 11 years later, and my youngest brother, Tommy, was born on Christmas Day. So that's my family background. My mother's father is quite a character. He married a number of times. His first marriage was, he fathered a daughter named Clara. Mama talked about her often. They had a relationship. Then he married my mother's mother, and they had 7 boys and 5 girls. And then he divorced my grandmother, Alice, and married my father's mother, Carrie, which created a bit of a situation in the family. I knew both of my grandmothers. I knew who they were, but I didn't really know them. Both were Grandma Boutwell. Grandma Meeker Boutwell was a smaller woman, stern, not a personable grandma. Grandma Boutwell, my mother's mother, was more relaxed and fun to be around. Of course, with that many kids, she was well acquainted with children and knew how to handle them. My father's father died while my dad was in high school, so he had to quit school to take care of his brother and 2 sisters. Over the years, I've lost contact with them. His brother lived in Galveston, Texas, and had a manufacturing plant of chemicals, cleaning chemicals. His sister Louise was a nurse, had twin daughters. His sister Audrey married a guy they called Bing, in reference to Bing Crosby, who was quite popular at that time. I never heard Bing sing, but that was the reason for his nickname. My mother's family, I mentioned the 5 girls. Mama was second to the oldest, and the boys were all in the Navy except one who joined the Army. So there were 6 Navy people and 1 Army. Mama's sister Jean was in the Navy, the Waves, and her sister-in-law Elizabeth, who married the Army guy, was a WAC of the Army. We lived in Ohio. My daddy was a farmer. Mama was a housewife. Daddy farmed during the summer, and during the winter, he would travel to Toledo or Detroit and work in factories there. And I now have a much deeper appreciation for the work that he did to support his family. We had a good childhood. We lived on a farm that had a barnyard, like a square in the middle of the outbuildings. And in the wintertime, Daddy would fill that with water and it would freeze over. And we could ice skate and sled and just have all kinds of fun on it. Then in the springtime, when it melted, we had a pony called Trixie. And one of Mama's sisters was there with her children. And they had just bought their oldest son a new suit. I think it was around Easter time. But he wanted to ride Trixie, and he did. And Trixie was tired, and she went to the pond, the ice pond that had melted and was just a mud puddle now, and laid down. And Jim got his clothes, his new suit, all muddy. It was not a happy day for him. I had a pet goat. I don't remember its name, but I was about 3 years old, and I do remember that little goat and what fun it was to watch, see it jump around and move like they do. We had cows on our farm that were milk cows, but they also made great riding animals. When Mom and Daddy weren't around, there were some things you could do when they weren't around that you probably wouldn't do if they had been there. Talking about Trixie, our pony, my older brother Ted was teaching her to jump, and in the pasture next to the road, he had put a post up and then laid a bar across it so that she would jump that bar. And I had been told I could not do that. That was not for me to do. Well, being the very sweet, obedient child that I was most of the time, I didn't. But Mom and Daddy were gone. Ted obviously wasn't around, but I put the bridle on Trixie, and we were practicing jumping. And there was a car traveling along the road, and Trixie wanted to run with that car, and did until she got to the hurdle. And she whirled around the side of it, threw me off, and I wrapped around the post backwards, knocked the wind out of me. I do remember that. And I remember putting her up, and I don't know that I ever told about that. Some things you just keep to yourself. And another thing, speaking of being an obedient and compliant child, we lived in the country, and we often had family come from Detroit and Toledo to go hunting in the hunting season. And this is in the 30s and 40s. We did not have inside plumbing, but we lived on a farm that had an outside toilet with 3 holes in it, different sizes, so we were really high-class people. Anyway, it was hunting season, and I had an aunt who was from Detroit, and I thought, oh my, she's just really somebody special. She had a fur coat, and Maxine was her name, and she just impressed me very, very much. Very young child, very impressionable. Now I know better. But anyway, it was hunting season. There was snow on the ground. It was late in the day, and Maxine needed to use the outhouse. And she had made that announcement several times, but she hadn't made any move towards the door. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun? So I went out and gathered snow, and since there was no electricity, the only light that was in the outhouse was through the cracks in the wall, or if you left the door open. And of course you wanted privacy, so you closed the door. But I lined every one of the 3 holes with little snowballs. And when Aunt Maxine went out, it was dark and she couldn't see, and she sat down on the snowballs. And she didn't think that was very funny. I don't remember what happened then. Sometimes it's good not to be able to remember things. And I walked down a long lane to catch the school bus when we started school. And Mama had planned my first birthday party, 6 years old, first grade. And I came down with chicken pox, and that canceled that party. I was heartbroken. Don't remember ever having another birthday party until, oh, I did. There were some church friends that threw a surprise after church gathering for me. I'd forgotten about that. Bob and Ruth Mannett, Bob and Nikki Rudder, and several other people. And we just always had a good time after church. We would get together at each other's houses and make homemade ice cream or whatever, and just have a good time. Anyway, I started to tell about my 80th birthday surprise party. I had a friend visiting from Georgia. She was a little older than I was, and she had lived in this area and was well known. Anyway, Buddy had called and wanted to know what we were doing Friday night for my birthday, and I said, we don't have any plans. Well, we'll go out to dinner. And I said, well, remember Doris is here. He said, well, she can come too. And I thought, well, I was just telling you that, so make it easier for her to get around. Anyway, he picked us up, and we're driving along, and he said, we need to stop here at church. They want to see you for something. And we pulled in, and it was a Friday night, and that was usually youth activity night, so I didn't suspect anything until I got to the door, and they opened the door, and there's this huge pink happy birthday sign, and went inside, and there was almost 100 people shouting happy birthday surprise, and it was, but it was a wonderful time. But going back to high school, to school days, we went to country schools. My brother Ted, in his class, there were 4 boys and 5 girls. In my class, there were 14 kids. When we moved to Miami, there were 22 children in my home room. So it was culture shock in a big, big way. Can we stop for a moment?